The following program contains views that are not those of WVTC, iNetworks Communications, their subsidiaries, affiliates, or financial supporters.
Welcome to We Live in Our Faith and Under the Law. I am here with partner, I guess my partner in life and my partner in the law, Attorney Rodney Howard. We've been on for a few weeks now in WBTC, and we bring to you issues that the church is faced with today in this climate, in this world. Some of these issues the church has had to deal with over time. And today we're going to talk about, spend a lot of time on immigration and sanctuary for the church. Is the church a sanctuary? Can it be a sanctuary? What are the risks involved? And so we're going to open up with a discussion with Attorney Howard here on risk management. What is risk management?
Well, most of our churches are insured, hopefully. And as a part of church insurance, the insurance companies require the churches to engage in certain protocols, which they have labeled risk management. And part of that has to do with how the church conducts its affairs to minimize the possibilities of having claims filed against the church, especially in the areas where it involves church volunteers and church employees having access to children and also vehicles and other things that can create a liability for the church itself. One of the things that the insurance companies require, and certainly it's good practice for our churches, is that there be an established protocol within the church that addresses these risk areas, and also that there be some training of the church administration to deal with certain aspects of this risk management. One of the big areas that churches have is with regard to volunteers and employees who are going to be interacting with young people. And so one of the things that is advocated is that the church have a formal agreement with whoever they intend to hire or use as volunteers in these situations. One of the things that we have as church people often is we have an abundance of trust, and we are willing to accept anybody who comes forward and wants to volunteer to be active in a church ministry. Unfortunately, there are some things in the world that bode against some of the activities that we used to have and take for granted.
Well, you can start with the children. You do know that pedophiles appear to be wonderful people, especially the children. You don't know them as pedophiles when you see them. They come to your church and they say, hey, I want to work with young people. And that's all good, but you first have to screen them. You should do background checks on all persons that are going to work with children. I know you say it's a church and we're all people of faith. Yes, we are people of faith, but everybody is not at the same level of faith and everyone is not the same commitment. But you're going to have to do a criminal background check. So at least you can eliminate those who already have instances of child mishandling, child abuse. Secondly, all of the staff and volunteers, they had to have some training, right?
They do have to have some training, but also, even with all of that, churches are repeatedly now coming into the position of having to have some formal HR activities. And so part of that means that you have to get sufficient background information on the people who are prospective employees or prospective volunteers. You don't want to say that the church did not sufficiently look at the background and get the information.
So you're saying that even if I'm going to volunteer for my church, I need to be screened by human resources like at a job?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in some instances, you need to be screened more than you would be at a regular job. One of the things that, as you indicated, pedophiles gravitate towards places where they have ready access to young people. And the church is one of the easiest places where they can make themselves available. And that's something that you have to guard against. And so you have to go into the background of the people who are volunteering as well as the people who are going to be employed by the church, because you are providing an opportunity to give them access to the young people. So get contact information first. That's necessary because you can't, the church has no excuse to say if they got into a situation where there was a lawsuit, that they didn't have the background information on the person that they have allowed to have contact with the young people.
And so when you have youth ministers, youth directors, and youth leaders, you have to be very careful who they are. So you got to do the background check. You also need to not just do a criminal background check, but you need to do an analysis in the background of that person. Where have they worked before? And you have to do some reference checks. They say they worked at church XYZ or at school XYZ. Why did they leave? What happened there? You need to do more due diligence. Most of we've had children that have been abducted by youth workers. And this is not mythical, this is fact. There are young people, you should never have any one adult in a room or on a bus with children. You know, you always say Brother Jones will drop off the children after the youth ministry. Well, Brother Jones dropping them off alone, the children can lie and say that Brother Jones did something. There is no witness other than other children, and they tend to stand together. So even on church transportation, you don't leave adults with minors alone. There should be at least 2 adults. And you say, well, we don't have that many people. Well, you better get some, because you're creating an atmosphere where liability can occur. I have taken children on bus trips. I've had to pay security to monitor the hallways, see who's going in and out of the rooms of the young people, and chaperones. And you have to monitor the chaperones, but you also have to train them so they understand the risk of interacting with children.
And part of that also requires that you have to develop a written application, both for the people who are going to interact with the young people and also for the young people themselves. There should be some parental consent forms, which also indicate if there is any allergies or other medical issues that the young people are going to have. And also you want to make sure that you have sufficient contact information with the young people so that you can contact their parents in the case of an emergency. So these are some of the basic things that you have to have or should have as a part of your church ministry for young people.
And we have been joined by our other co-host. He thinks he's really in charge, the Reverend Dr. Aaron McLeod, Esquire. He's on, I think he's in, where you out of the country, right?
I am out of the country today, handling some.
He just to travel. We just have to work.
He's our international expert.
Yes. So we're talking about risk management, Attorney McLeod, and then in the second show, we're going to spend all of the time on immigration and what you're doing, which is some powerful ministry that churches can engage in. So when you think about risk management, it's not just what happens with children, but happens in the building. Risk management, slip and fall. You have to have rules about reporting. How do you report things that happen on your premises? Because people say, I failed at the church. and it caused me to break my hip, break my leg, break my arm. How do you make sure that it did occur at the church and the person is not just using the church as a deep source of, so what do you do?
Well, first of all, you have an incident report form that is available so that you can take down the information about the incident and the witnesses and get the contact information for those persons who may have witnessed the incident. The second thing is you have to designate and make sure that the people know that they are responsible for getting the information, either ushers or some responsible person. Whenever there's an incident, there should be already in place somebody responsible for collecting the information and putting it into the incident report form. That's first of all.
And then you have more than what just be falling at the church. The other incidents, like you've had churches where they had problems with a roof leak. 15 people saw water, but there's no incident report, no pictures of when the roof started leaking, dated, and information. So when you go to the insurance company, they of course don't want to pay anything, any claims if they don't have to. You have to have documentation. So incidents for slips and falls, incidents for damage to the property, like these storms that keep coming.
Well, not only that, but certain churches have had fires within the church in the kitchen.
Right.
We've certainly had that experience at our church. Someone actually was burned as a result of the fire because their clothing caught fire. So we want to make sure that when we have an incident, we have the sufficient reporting, but also a response. Somebody has to be responsible for addressing that and also calling the emergency services. If the ambulance is required, we have to know who's going to make that call and make sure that it gets called immediately. So those are the kinds of things that you want to make sure you have in place before the incident occurs.
And for example, in the storm, first thing that goes, electricity. What is your backup generator at the church? What happens if a storm hits and everybody's in worship, lights out, it's power is down? What is your backup? Most churches have not thought about it. Yet we have storms every day, every year. You have to be prepared for it. How do you prepare for the risk that may come or is sure to come? Fires, do you have the legal fire extinguishers all around the church property? I have been to several churches. I've never seen one.
Well, in addition to
in the kitchen,
to the fire extinguishers and that kind of thing, do you have an evacuation plan for the congregation at your church?
And have you practiced it? It's one thing to write up some paper, but do the people know if there's a threat assessment on the front steps of the church, what do you want the people that are in the congregation to do? How do they get out?
And there should be at least several written evacuation plans that are posted so that people know where to go. Now, most churches hopefully have emergency lighting for those incidents where the lighting goes out. But I can tell you, I was at a church where there was the lighting went out during a choir rehearsal on a Tuesday night. And we didn't have the lighting to get from the back of the church where the choir was practicing to the front of the church. And so part of that has to do with the idea that you have to have the necessary emergency equipment readily available and people who know where it is so that you can address those kinds of issues.
Professor, you make
It's a big deal.
Yeah. Can I interject, Professor?
Yes, sir.
We're waiting on you.
Yeah. You make an awesome point. What we see now is a trend within insurance companies that are denying coverage. And with that, as you tell us to not only go through and do the necessary drills, we want to document that those drills were done to ensure that we have proof that we have been compliant or that we are cognizant about our own protocols and procedures as far as ensuring that the risk management protocols are being followed. My colleagues and I, in the practice, find ourselves having to enter into litigation against insurance companies that are not honoring policies. And their initial defense outside of litigation is they're looking at the breaches of the policy. And as you said on other shows that we've done, make sure that you're writing your writers, understanding what your responsibilities are, because they're looking for an out, not to pay.
So you want to introduce our special guest? He's going to come back more and more.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. We have Mr. Peter Lopresti. Peter is the CEO of Samaritans for the Common Good, which is a nonprofit here in Illinois that works for the advocacy for immigrants here in our country. We're headquartered here in Illinois, but more specifically, it has a national focus. He is also the Consul General, Honorary Consul General for Costa Rica, and is a celebrated professional within real estate, a native of Chicago, an alumnus of the University of Chicago, but more specifically, he has a heart to serve people, to ensure that the least of these are not on the margins and are at the forefront of our hearts and our minds.
So we're talking about risk management right now, and then we're going to get into immigration in the next program. You want to weigh in on how do churches protect themselves as we look at risk management issues, whether it's children, we got slips and falls, evacuation, and emergency
And
lighting.
then we also have the questions of sexual assaults that take place in churches as well. Many churches now are being sued, and not just the church itself, the local church, but the denomination, because of sexual misconduct that occurs in churches. So that's another area. And then beyond that, there are churches where people have protective orders to protect their children, and we don't know necessarily who are the people who have obtained a protective order on behalf of their children against another member of the church. So that's another thing that we have experienced. That we have to be in a position, the church has to be in a position to deal with when they find out that there's a protective order that says a certain person cannot come within 100 feet of the young person that has the protective order. So that's that.
Well, before they have a protective order, I had a situation where a former minister who had abused his own children was released from prison. He comes back to the church, puts a robe on, and the children were in church. And I didn't even know who he was. No one had told me. We didn't expect him to come that Sunday anyway. And when I found out what the deal was, the issue was he can't be there because it was his trauma. I mean, his children went crazy during service. And, so the church is saying, well, what do we do? Jesus forgave. Yeah, but I'm not Jesus. He cannot be here because the trauma to the children were very young. And so you have to really look at people that have been found guilty of sex crimes. That's a whole another issue. If they have been convicted and served time, what do you do with them? They can't come back into the congregation unless somebody's going to be with them at all times during service, during the time they're in the building. That means you got to go. If children can't go to the bathroom without someone, he or she cannot just move around freely. So those are some issues you have to look at. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I am familiar with, of course, I don't have any experience with operating a congregation or a church, but from the construction perspective and from the community organizing perspective, I'm always concerned about churches who really love their community and try to step up. And unfortunately, sometimes there can be issues with permitting with local municipal governments. And there's also, again, as we talk about risk, when you have, let's say, if you open your doors to house people 24 hours a day, all of a sudden a structure that could be considered a religious use and is exempt now has to all of a sudden qualify for all the requirements that is required with housing, especially in Chicago, where we have a lot of ordinances and a lot of permitting that's required to do this. And so I always view these churches, these communities, they're always an instrument for good in their neighborhoods. And I'm always so sad to learn that sometimes the more good you try to do and the more different types of way you try to touch people's lives, unfortunately, that can also create risk for these different congregations.
That's why you can't have Handy Andy fixing up the place that you're going to house some migrants, house some homeless people, which all of great ministry, but you can't ask Handy Andy because you don't want to pay the licensed person to do it, and you don't want to go get a city
building permit.
Well, guess what? Anything happens, now the church is fully liable because you have no protection, because you circumvented the law. I mean, it's just, and I know I'm not trying to scare you, not trying to stop you from doing ministry, but I am trying to tell you, we are trying to tell you that there's a list of things. I got building maintenance. You can't have a janitor who's volunteer mop the floor 10 minutes before service starts. Somebody walks in the church, slips and falls. What is that, gentlemen? You're nodding your head.
Absolutely. I mean, it's unfortunate too. You'd love to see a society where people are rewarded for trying new things and reaching out to the community, but unfortunately, that's not the reality of how it's in the United States. And so, like you said, being able to protect yourself when you're trying to do these good things in the community is really important. Trying to be proactive and trying to avoid any of these pitfalls whenever your congregation is trying to, let's say, provide a new service to the community is really important.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think we certainly want to make sure that, as we said, this program is about living in our faith, but under the law. We want to make sure that you are complying with the law, especially with regard to these serious issues that are a risk not only for the individual, but for the church itself. And the church can't be a beacon to serve the community if, in fact, it's going to be putting members and the public at risk as well. So we want to minimize the risk. That's the issue that we are addressing right now.
And so the other thing is there's some risk you have. I keep talking about the storms because they're present. You have mold when you have a lot of water that stays for a while. So you have to deal with that. You can't just keep worshiping and say the Lord will provide. Yes, God does provide, but you need to get the mold out of the church. You need to get you have to have it properly cleaned. It's not just I washed the wall, the mold is still there. So there are things that you have to do when you've had some incidents that cause your church to be at risk. And you have to think about those things, and you have to prepare in advance. If you know storms are coming, you already need to have a plan for that. You need to have a plan for how do you remove snow. That's another issue. That's a risk, because if you don't get the snow all the way up, that's a problem because somebody slips on the church property and falls.
And if you have food services that the church is providing, the church kitchen and the sanitation that's involved has to be up to par. It has to be up to the code necessary to provide the food services that you're providing, because you don't want anybody getting sick at the church and coming back and saying that the church was responsible for that illness.
And do know this, lawyers are going to sue for deep pockets. So they're not going to sue Mary Jane, who's been cooking for 100 years. They're going to sue the church because you have the deep pockets. Miss Mary, who's been cooking, and we love her cooking, too bad. They're suing the church. She doesn't have the resources to pay for the lawsuit. So the kitchen, I have been to church kitchens. They're not clean and sanitized in many ways up to the standards of a restaurant. And yet you act like you're a restaurant. You give out food. Sometimes you're selling food. You can't have people bring food from home because you can't trace what happened to the food between the house and the church. You don't know what the house kitchen looks like. You have to have sanitation training if you're going to feed even the homeless. Trust me, they will sue you too.
Absolutely. And so specifically in Chicago, we have a food handlers. Sorry, in Chicago, we have a food handler's license that everyone who touches the food or handles the food has to have this license. And I think you have to renew it every year as well. So
Yes.
it's not even just the church has to be certified. The individuals, each who go ahead and serve and touch the food, have to be certified individually as well. And so it is important to stay compliant and reduce risk, as you mentioned.
Yeah, because you got to think about the church is to teach our faith, but we live in our faith and under the law. So we got 5 minutes to close, gentlemen.
Well,
There's 3 gentlemen. Y'all get your close
well, let's start with Aaron since he is,
out of the country.
yes,
I don't even think it's fair.
but he's pastoring. So
Yes, Aaron, Reverend Cloud.
Well, I think this is very, the conversation and the commentary is so appropriate for churches. I know on a annual basis at my denomination, the United Church of Christ, United Methodist Church, as well as United Church of Christ, but in the Northern Illinois Conference, we come and we have training. And it's lay-led in particular, whereby we go and make sure that we are compliant and that we're having best practices developed within our congregations. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so making sure that we have our audits, that we're following our protocols. Our denomination, we call it safe sanctuary when we're dealing with children, as well as even when we're dealing with adults. I'll never forget, Dr. Wilson, almost 20 years ago now, you and I went to a conference with D. Darrell Griffin,
Right.
and it was this whole commentary about systems. And if you ever read the book, The E-Myth, and it applies to nonprofits as well, you live and you die by your systems. And so the more agile and the more documentation you have, but more specifically, you're working in those systems, the more likely you are to be risk averse in our efforts to manage our risk.
and I can only add that I hope our churches are developing those systems and not only developing them, but utilizing them and reviewing them on a regular basis, because a lot of times we'll put a system in place and forget about it for 10 years until certain incidents happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my final thoughts are simply to reach out to other members of your community or to peer institutions, reach out to other churches, reach out to the leaders. If your church is looking to expand a new type of service, such as ministering food to the hungry or providing housing to those who are unsheltered, definitely go ahead and reach out to the experts in your field, like such as yourself, Pastor McLeod, and the other members here. Reach out to people who have experience. Usually when you're helping people are willing to help you out. They're willing to give you that advice that you need to get started. If people see that you're trying to do something well-intentioned, they're usually willing to help guide you along the way. And I just highly recommend to everyone to seek out that guidance, because it's so much easier to get it beforehand before you make a mistake. And of course, we're all about talking about reducing the risks in this episode.
And what you want to do is have a checklist so that you understand the risks that are before you, so that you know you need to have applications for everybody that's going to volunteer or be hired by you to provide services for your church. You need a record for them. You need to make sure that there's training so that they know the risk and their responsibility with regard to the risk, whether it's transporting people, not just children, but transporting people back and forth to and from church. You need to make sure that your facility management and maintenance is scheduled properly. And you don't have people putting rugs that are crinkled up on the floor that someone can easily trip and fall. They trip and fall, they sue the church. Sexual assaults are on the rise in our faith institutions. And so you have to make sure that you're protecting those who come to worship God from those who come to pray on the church. And there's a lot. Housing, if you're going to do homeless facilities, try to house the homeless. That's a great area of ministry, but it's also a great area of liability. And we're going to talk about migrants and sanctuaries in the next show next week. So don't forget to tune back in. You keep studying the Bible till you meet this author face to face. But remember, live in your faith, but under the law. See you next week.
Go to your Apple or Google Play Store and download the WVTC Gospel Radio app today. You can also say, Alexa, play WVTC Radio Skills.
Would you like to play WVTC Radio Network?
Absolutely. Download it today.
Views made on the preceding program are not those of WVTC Radio, iNetworks Communications, or their financial supporters.
Winning victory through Christ, WVTC Allsip Chicago, and iNetworks Communications Station.